Okay, today we're going to start on Ayin Gimel. Ayin Gimel, that's 73a. It's a Mishnah, 73a. That's Yayin Nessa, is the Mishnah. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. Especially we're learning Mishnah immediately. And the learning for Shleima, my father, and also for Naftali ben Menachem Bela. Hey, good morning. Okay, so the Mishnah starts like this. Yayin Nessa, that means wine that was used, was poured in front of an idol, an offering for an idol. Aser, it's prohibited. Well, not only is it prohibited, but it would make also everything else that it's poured into other wine, it would make that wine also aser. What is kolshu? It means the smallest amount. Smallest amount of a mixture would make the whole thing prohibited. Yayin biyayin. If it's wine that mixes with other wine, one's yayin nesach, one's yayin kasher, or mayim b'mayim, just like in the Beis Hamikdash, you would pour water on sukkahs, so also water could also be poured. For some reason we don't have a concern about water.
In the wine or separate?
No, it was poured just like in front of an idol. But if there was such water that was poured in front of an idol and mixed with other water, that would be also the culture. That would also be prohibited, the smallest amount. The logic here is that when something mixes with its own type, instead of getting diluted, it gets strengthened. You have more of it. That's the yayin b'mayim. Let's say wine mixes with water, or mayim b'yayin, or you have water that mixes with wine. That's b'nais and tam. Over there, you already see a dilution, and if it's diluted to the extent that you can't taste the prohibited part, which we would assume is like 1 in 60, is approximately the amount that you can't taste it, then it would be permissible. Zaklal, this is the rule. Whenever we say zaklal, we're coming to include something. Why do you need a rule if you told me all the examples? But it was so here's the rule. It means you want to include something that wasn't in the examples. So zaklal, this is the rule. Min b'minai, anything that's the same type as b'mashu, is the smallest amount. And b'shlai b'minai, if it's in a different type of mean, and we had a machlekes before, if it means a different name or a different taste. Whatever the case is, wine and water, let's say, is shleib minus b'nais and tam. It's only prohibited if it gives a flavor, which is approximately 1 in 60. Okay, now, so we learned in the Mishnah that wine makes something prohibited, even the smallest amount, if it mixes with other wine. Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that it's not so simple. It depends how this mixture was done. Was this mixture that the prohibited wine was on the bottom and you poured kosher wine in it? Or is this mixture where you have kosher wine on the bottom and you poured prohibited wine into it? There's going to be a distinction there. It says, if you're pouring into a vat, into a pit that contains kosher wine, and you're pouring into it yayin nesach. So over there, when you have the large amount of the kosher wine and you're pouring in the non-kosher wine, he says, afilu koliyim kulei rishon rishon batal. He says that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is talking about when you had non-kosher wine on the bottom and you're pouring in a lot of kosher wine. So we say all of that kosher wine becomes non-kosher. But if it's the opposite, if you have the kosher wine on the bottom and you're pouring in non-kosher wine, every little drop that you pour in becomes nullified. You pour in a drop, nullified, pour in a drop, nullified. Even the whole day, you keep pouring in more and more drops. We don't say that it finds its original friend in the yayin nesach and it overpowers the kosher wine. We don't say that. We say that every drop becomes nullified. It's a very lenient opinion here. And Chaim was mentioning to me that it seems like it argues with the Mishnah, but I guess the way that we would learn this is that Rav Dimi is saying the Mishnah is only talking about when you have the non-kosher wine on the bottom. Let me see how he writes it here. This is the
about water.
Sifta Gemara. It says. Gemara Tavaras Prati Adinim Mishnah V'im HaMeduber Bagam Ba'ifen She'Isser Nesarav Beheter Eidafka Im HaHeter Hu She'Nesarav Be'Isser. That's the introduction to this Gemara. So, I'm sorry, David, want to mention something?
No, some people like go to Cirque versus house, water on the top.
You pour water into the wine. Yeah, there's the concept of mixing some water into the wine. Yeah, right.
Make it overflow, please.
Oh, I don't know. That's now you're mixing two concepts there.
Sometimes people put 3 drops of water at the end because of a holistic principle that since the wine is the power, and water is the chesed. The geometric equivalent kind of adds up. You add the 3 drops of water.
Nice. Okay. It turns out that according to Rav Dimi, number one, the concept that we learned in the Mishnah that Yayin Nesach is Eiser B'Mashu Min B'Mina, if it's the same type, it makes everything prohibited. It's not so simple. That would only be if the Yayin Nesach was on the bottom and you poured kosher wine in on the top, but not the opposite. And second of all, is that when Yayin Nesach, with the opposite, that Yayin Nesach falls onto Heter, not only is it batal, but even if you keep pouring it, it doesn't reawaken. Very, very lenient opinion. Okay. There's a discussion in the commentaries here, which I'm ignoring, regarding if it's prohibited to drink or prohibited for benefit. There's a discussion in the commentaries. It gets complicated. All right, I'm sure they bring all the different things. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised nobody brings questions from, the Mishnayos to say at the end of that, so moved, if something falls into mikveh, you have to waste your amount. If the color goes away, it's the concepts there don't seem to even question.
Yeah. We're not discussing color.
That's what
there is a discussion in halacha regarding color, but it doesn't mention it. Right. Just the flavor. Okay, Tanan. We quote the Mishnah. Say like this: Yayin nesach aser va'isur b'kolshu. Yayin nesach is aser. That's what our Mishnah says, and it makes prohibited. Also, it makes prohibited anything else that it mixes with. My love, is it not? The kanafal isura legavatera. Wouldn't that be a case where we have the kosher on the bottom and the yayin nesach is pouring into it? And it says that the Mishnah was not specific. It says that it's iser, but that's probably in every case. So comes along Rav Dimi and is telling me this thing, but the Mishnah seems to contradict the Mishnah. It says, "Boy, no. Kanafal hetera legavisura." Over there, it's talking about the Mishnah that says that yayin nesach, 1 drop yayin nesach makes the whole thing aser. That's because the bottom was the yisr, and you were pouring the heter into it. So even if you pour a lot of heter, all that heter becomes aser. It would make everything aser. Even if you pour the whole day, more and more wine pouring into it. Yeah. They have this expression in business: pouring good money on bad money, or something. You just keep adding to it. It doesn't help. It's not going to solve the issue, right? Right. So, There's an interesting point here. It's not relevant to anything, but there is an interesting point that in the concept of bittul, I always understood it like this, that you have the physical world, which everything here is theoretically permissible. There are certain things that are prohibited. So when they fall into to 1 in 60, so that uniqueness, that prohibited uniqueness that it has, like dissipates, and it just goes back into the natural world where everything is permissible. Because you lose the uniqueness of it. But I would never say the opposite. I would never say that something that's permissible becomes nullified to the prohibited, that it becomes uniquely prohibited. That concept is strange. That heter should be bottled to. You always say isser is bottled to heter. Isser is bottled, but heter should be over here. That's the way I understood it, and I actually read that in a sefer. But Naftali, if he listens to this, I read it in Midas L'Cheker Halacha from Rav Amiel. He writes this like as the rule. This is the philosophy of all of it. But over here, especially from Rashi, he spells it out. He says that the heter becomes bottled to the isser, which is just the wording of it is not the way it philosophically works. Sorry? Okay. Now, so the Gemara gave us a teretz over here that there's a difference between our Mishnah and Rav Dimi, what's falling into what. Okay. Tashema. Come and listen. Okay, so just to get the flow over here, the Mishnah is talking about that the heter fell into the isser. The isser's on the bottom. Tashema, yayin b'mayim. We learned in the Mishnah, it says that if wine mixes with water, nice and tam, so then it's going to be usher if you taste the wine in the water. My love, is it not? Kanafel chamra di surilamaya de teira. Well, it's the obvious case. The water is kosher. The wine is the prohibited one, right? That's the simple case. And wine is falling into the water. And we say that it's b'nais and tam. Then what does it mean b'nais and tam? That means that if I poured in a little bit of wine, I can't taste it yet. If I pour in a little more, I'm starting to taste it. I got the taste. Now it becomes usher. According to Rav Dimi, when you poured in a little bit of wine, he said before that if you poured wine on top of wine, it becomes bottle. And then you pour in more, it's bottle again. Bottle every drop. You can pour the whole thing, yayin nesach, it's all bottle. But according to this, you don't say that it's bottle. You say that it reactivates. Because you'll get the taste afterwards. So the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rav Dimi.
So you were saying before about nullification.
Yeah.
So when you do an Avera, if you do a bunch more mitzvahs on top, then it can turn into a mitzvah. Is that what you're saying?
Let's leave that discussion for afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Don't get me started. Okay. Lie. The Gemara says no. That's not the case. The kanafel chamra de teira lamaya disur. It's exactly the opposite. It's counterintuitive, but we're talking about where there's kosher wine falling into non-kosher water. How's it non-kosher water? Because the water was used as a libation. Okay. Gemara says, okay, if that's what you want to say, if that's what we're referring to here in our Mishnah, when it says water, it means prohibited water. Let's go further. Let's talk about prohibited water. Let's read further in the Mishnah. Ketani Seifa, you read further, it says, Mayim biyayin b'naisin tam. If prohibited water falls into wine, into kosher wine, it would be b'naisin tam. 1 second. According to Reb Dimi, if when I have the prohibited falling into the permissible, I say that it becomes nullified. And here I'm not saying it's become nullified. I'm saying that it gets reactivated when you have that amount. It's a kind of question on Reb Dimi. Amlach Reb Dimi. Reb Dimi would respond to you. Kula masnis. He would explain the Mishnah. Kula masnis neter l'gavisur. Let's not look at the item. Let's look at the scenario. It's not the wine is kosher. The wine is prohibited. The water is kosher. The water is prohibited. That's not what we're doing in the Mishnah. thing in the Mishnah is we have on the bottom, we have prohibited. I don't care if it's wine or water. On the top, we have permissible. I don't care if it's wine or water. And then, Reisha the Kanafal Chamr de Ter L'Maydi Surah. First part of the Mishnah is when the kosher wine falls into the prohibited water. And Seifa, the end of the Mishnah is the Kanafal Maydi Ter L'Chamr Surah, is where the kosher water falls into the prohibited wine. And that's why we say that it's always going to be aser. We meant b'mashu. That means when you pour it in, as much as you're going to pour in to the pot of non-kosher, all that kosher is going to become non-kosher. As much as you're going to pour in, it doesn't matter how much you pour in. That was Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi is not usually accepted in the Gemara. Whenever you see Rav Dimi, you usually see a follow-up of someone else saying in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, and the follow-up is usually more accepted. That's the way, in general, in the Gemara works. Gesser Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, he came and he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Amara yayin esech mit tzartzer katan lebar. How do they translate tzartzer? Like a flask? Small pitcher. If you pour yayin nesech, okay, the non-kosher, and you're pouring it into from a small pitcher, and you're pouring it into a bar, into a big vat, a big pit, cistern of kosher wine. Afilu kalayim kula, even if you're pouring the entire day from the small pitcher, Rishon batal, we say that it's nullified. Now that's very similar to Rav Dimi, but not actually what Rav Dimi said. Rav Dimi said even if you pour from a barrel, he says no, only from a small pitcher. B'dav ketzer katan, specifically a small pitcher. The leinafish amudei, it doesn't have a large stream in the flow. Aval chaves the nafesh amudei loy, but if you're pouring from a barrel that has a large stream, then we're not going to say that. We're not going to say that. Rishon batal, we're going to say that we're going to look at, it doesn't have to do with nitzak. It sounds like nitzak, but I think what it has to do with is that because when you lift up a barrel, all the contents of the barrel are on its way out. So sure, you can stop it, but naturally, all the contents of the barrel are on its way out. It's as if the entire barrel is already here. Now, if that's the case, then I don't view it as drop by drop being nullified. I have to view it as a large amount versus whatever's in the pit, in the cistern. So I have to look at the whole contents of the barrel, and now I have to measure that against it. I look at the whole content. But if I'm pouring from a small pitcher, then I don't have all the contents of the barrel on its way out. Because in a small pitcher, I only have the top that's on its way out because you don't lift the whole pitcher up, right? So,
Is this one that's being poured in for sure yayin nesech?
Yeah,
And what if it was kosher wine poured by an idolater?
that's the idea.
The same equivalent.
Yeah, but we made a difference over there when he's pouring. What's out of it is usher. What's in it is mutter. That you're making
Unless you had a large barrel where it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we said that there by the barrel. Nitzuk was. Do we say that it conducts backwards? Okay. Kiyasa Ravin. Ravin came. Ravin was another traveler. Rav Dimi was a traveler. He brought the words of Rabbi Yechanan. Well, Ravin is another traveler. He brought the words of Rabbi Yechanan. Yes, Ravin Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Yayin nesach shnafel lebar. Let's say, according to Ravin, Rabbi Yechanan doesn't hold of the whole thing that Rav Dimi mentioned about becoming nullified. He says that Rabbi Yechanan had a different statement. It wasn't regarding if you pour drop by drop into kosher, it's going to be. It's not referring to that. He says, two things fell into this. You're really not careful. First of all, you dropped yayin nesach into it, and you also dropped into it a jug of water fell into this. Now, my problem is like this. My problem is wine becomes prohibited. Wine and water, I have to look at the taste. So now I have wine that's, what's on the bottom over here? Kosher wine. I also have kosher water. that just fell in. And I also have non-kosher wine that fell in. So I have two ways of viewing this mixture. I can view it as the wine fell into the wine, and I can view it as the wine fell into the water. Right? It's mixing into both.
Doesn't matter which one happened first.
We're going to see in a moment. But meanwhile, with ignoring that detail, Rabbi Yochanan says that I can view the wine that it fell into the water and ignore the other wine in there and say that it became permissible. So he says like this: Royan esa heter kila einai. What does it mean? Royan esa heter kila einai. I ignore the kosher wine. Ignore the kosher wine. And I just look at Vashar Maim Rabban Al, and I just look at the water, and the water would overpower the non-kosher wine. If you ignore the kosher wine, then you're in a better situation, and the water would overpower it and make it nullified. Okay, that's what Ravin says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, but what's happening here is that Ravin is rejecting what Rav Dimi said, that it would become nullified even without the water. Donna? Yasser Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Rabbi Yochanan. When Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Hillel was saying. It depends what fell in first. If the water fell in first, then I can say that now the yayin nesach falls on top and it fell into the water. But if the yayin nesach fell first into the wine and the water fell afterwards, then matzah binas minai v'neyer. What's gonna happen is I'm gonna say that the wine hit the wine and it awakens the wine, and I don't say that the water is gonna nullify the non-kosher wine. Tell me again.
Usher means
Also means
prohibited.
prohibited, yeah. Not permitted, prohibited. Mutar is permitted. You see the M in mutar? It's the permitted. Mutar, permitted. And also it's just prohibited. Okay. What did we say over here? Some taught this Reb Shmuel Bar Yehuda not on the words of Ravin, but he taught it directly on the Mishnah. It says like this.
Where is this Reb Shmuel?
I'm not sure. He's a student of Rabbi Yochanan.
Keep looking. What is
He's not common enough to be on the
He's
chart.
not listening. No, because Reuben and Reb Dum.
Oh, those are very
They're
common.
right next to each
Yeah,
other.
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, those are very common.
What does header mean? Aside from like mutar and right, like what's the difference between mutar and header?
Mutter means it is permissible, and heter is an adjective of the object. The object is permissible. Heter would be the adjective. That would be the modifier. Saying this is considered heter.
It's the noun. You have a
It's the
heter,
noun.
and it's mutar.
And that becomes a noun. It's an adjective type of noun.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So it's the same idea. So this is now ikad the masin lamasnisin. Some taught on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says yayin biyayin. The Mishnah says wine. Hey, wine that falls into wine becomes aser b'kolshu. Even the smallest amount. So yayin biyayin is even the smallest amount is aser. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That's only if no water fell inside. But if water fell inside as well, then we ignore the wine, the kosher wine. And the water that's there can nullify the wine. Okay, we're learning here is the distinction between min b'minai, non-kosher wine, ayin gimel amid, Avodah Zara, ayin gimel amid aleph. If wine falls into wine, non-kosher wine, Nessa falls into regular wine, everything becomes aser. Falls into water, then you have to see if it gives a taste. Min b'minai versus min b'sheina minai. So what happens if you have both? If you have min b'minai with sheina minai. So Rabbi Yochanan was saying that you can ignore the minai, and the eina minai can overpower the lenient thing. Okay, now what's the difference if the words of Reb Shmuel Bar Yehuda were said on the Mishnah, or if they were taught on the laws of Ravin, on the statement of Ravin? What's the difference? We had two versions of this statement. What's the difference if it was taught on the Mishnah or if it was taught on Ravin? The one that taught it on the Mishnah, it's not necessary for the water to have fallen in first before the yayin nesach. However, because Ravin already said this exact halacha. So if Reb Shmuel Bar Reb Yitzchak is coming to add something, he would have to tell me the order of how it fell in. The Mishnah did not mention that there's water here. Ravin did. Comes along Reb Shmuel Bar Reb Yitzchak and says, if there's water, so what do you mean water? Ravin already said water. So what's Reb Shmuel? He's saying that no, the water had to be there first, and then before the yayin nesach. But according to if it's just Reb Shmuel Bar Yitzchak is talking on the Mishnah, then even if the water fell in afterwards, we can say that it becomes like purifies the yayin nesach, and that becomes nullified. It must be that I don't view all of the wine as usher. There's a problem here, because what happens if I have kosher wine and non-kosher wine falls in? And according to this opinion, even if it's not Rav Dimi's opinion, it's the opinion of Ravin, that all the kosher wine that's on the bottom becomes usher. Right? That's the rule. It's based on the Mishnah. Rav Dimi would argue, but that's the rule based on the Mishnah. So now I pour it in water. So now it becomes permissible. Like water is like this type of cleansing thing. So how does it become permissible? So it must be. This is two options here, two ways of understanding this. I'm speculating. One option could be that when does it become all usher? When you become aware of it. So if the water fell in afterwards, but you weren't aware of it yet, the psak only comes when you're aware of it, so it doesn't become the din of that it all becomes usher is only after awareness, and because the water fell in before you were aware of it, it's going to be permitted. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that I don't say that everything is usher because everything turns into isser. I say everything is usher because I have a mixture that I can't separate. But now when the water falls in, it's just usher because it's technically usher. It's not that everything switches into isser. But now when I have the water coming in, so the water can like kosherize whatever the wine was there. That's another possibility of understanding it.
This goes from my original question. Think back at the case of mikvah, where the opinion is one opinion, you wait 3 months until you have the geshamin. Once all the geshamin now kind of gets rid of colors, this and that, even though we're not discussing, then it's mutar. All right, you can't say, oh, it would have been really usur. You weren't allowed to go in there yet, but it's really just in potential waiting for enough water to make it kosher. It's very similar with that thought.
Okay.
You don't like that, no. I know you. I can tell you smile when you're just appeasing the.
It's much.
It's trying to be.
Do they comment over there which way do we have to understand this?
Don't succeed if you're in one try. Shot your shot.
No.
They're not mentioning. Okay. I could look in here, but it'll take time. It's my
the water, if the water falls in first, then you can come up with the concept of nice and tam or not. So when the wine falls in, it nullifies that concept because you got the equal amount of changing it back.
Perfect. Perfect. Now, let's say it's the opposite. Let's say the wine fell in first, the water fell in afterwards. So
Then
now
there's no havam in it to be nice
No.
and tam because it's min
No,
b'minoi.
Yeah, I understand, but there's two versions to this Gemara. One version is that Reb Shmuel Bar Yehuda was talking on Ravin, and you're right, the water needs to fall in first. But if it's talking about the Mishnah, if he was referring to the Mishnah, then the water doesn't need to fall in first. And according to that, how do you explain this? Because it was already min b'minai. So I'm suggesting two possibilities, but I'm sure that it's clear in the commentary. I just didn't look at it.
No, he was bringing up that it's a small amount. That was the chiddush. That it's a small amount, a
It is
small pitcher.
amount, but if the wine falls in, if the water falls in later, it's going to purify the mixture of small amount of non-kosher wine and large amount of kosher wine. But 1 second, how did you purify? Everything became usher.
Right.
So I'm suggesting two possibilities. Either it only becomes usher when you're aware of it, or I'm making it. I mean, it probably says mafarish. Okay.
Write that down.
Itmar, stated by Amoraim, which is usually a machlekes. Yayin nesach shenafal lebar. If non-kosher wine falls into a cistern of kosher wine, v'nafal sham kitin shamayim, and it also falls into it a jug, a small pitcher of water. Amar Chizkiah comes along Chizkiah, and he says like this. Now the wording here is this Gemara is written in such a like a difficult language. Higdilu be'isser, if it became enlarged because of the isser, which basically means that the wine, the kosher wine and the water were in there first. And then the non-kosher wine fell in. Say it's usher. Higdilu beheter. If it was the opposite, if the non-kosher wine and the water were in there first, and then the kosher wine fell in, and that's what enlarged it, then it's going to be mutter. What's the logic here? Logic would be like this.
Because the water was
The
in
water-
between.
The water,
So it was no longer Yayin Mino, it now was Min She'eno Mino, and then we went to 160.
so what he's saying is like this: the water in the wine that's there originally, if the water's in the kosher wine, I don't say that the kosher wine is bottled. The kosher wine is the kosher wine. Now, when the non-kosher wine falls in, it hits the kosher wine. But if the non-kosher wine was there, right, and it was there with water, then I say the non-kosher wine could become bottled in the water. It's already like a dilution there because it's min b'shein mina. And now, when the kosher wine falls in, I don't say that it hits the kosher wine. I say that it hits the water. It's the water. In other words, this would fit with that logic of bittul that I said before. What bittul does is it takes away a unique isser as opposed to the general world, which is all heter. So it takes away the uniqueness. So only when you have water with non-kosher wine does the uniqueness, the isser, start to become diluted. And then the kosher wine falls in, it's already diluted. But if it's there, two things of heter are there, kosher wine with water, I don't say that there's any bittul taking place. So then when the wine falls in, it would prohibit the other wine. That's the, we'll see. Rabbi Yirmiyah is not going to view it like this, but Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu higdilu be'isser, it's mutter. Rabbi Yochanan says that it doesn't matter which fell in first, whether it was the kosher wine that was there with the water or the non-kosher wine that was there with the water. Rabbi Yochanan says both cases it's going to be mutter. Okay. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zara. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to his teacher Rabbi Zara, let's say he's ignoring the logic that we just said. He has his own view on this. He says he's giving it with a fresh look. He's saying maybe this machlekes Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan about the order of how it fell in, versus Rabbi Yochanan says it doesn't matter, that it's always permissible. This is really another machlekes which we had previously in this Masechta between Rabbi Lezer and the Rabbanan regarding truma. The Tanan, it was taught in the Mishnah. Sa'or shel chulin v'shel truma shenafel techaisa. Lei bezeh kedei lechametz v'lei bezeh kedei lechametz v'nestarfu v'chimtzu. I have a dough, a mixture of flour and water, and I have a yeast. One of the yeasts that I have is truma. I don't have enough yeast of truma to activate the whole dough, but I don't have enough of the kosher yeast to activate the whole dough. Together, there's enough. Now I have a mixture of truma yeast, which means it's only allowed to be eaten by a kohen, and I have kosher yeast, which could be eaten by anyone, regular yeast, eaten by anyone, mixed together in this dough. So do I say that the whole dough can only be eaten now by a kohen? Do I say it can be eaten by anyone? Do I say that the truma yeast, which was not enough to activate the whole dough, do I say that it becomes nullified? Well, this is a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer Reimer, achar achron ani ba. He says the first yeast that you put in wasn't enough. It was the second yeast that you put in. That's the one that activated the whole dough to rise. And so therefore I have to see what was the last one. That's the main one, the one at the end. Right? Which bagel, if someone eats 10 bagels, which one filled them up? It's filled by the 10th one. It's the last one. Now I'm full. They said you should have eaten the last one first. So the Chacham say no. Bein shenafal iser betchila bein b'seif. It says it doesn't matter which one was first, which one was last. All of them are not sufficient. Each of them are not sufficient to activate to get the dough to rise, and so therefore it doesn't matter which one. They're both going to be. It's always going to be permissible unless the truma yeast was enough to activate the whole dough. Then it would be prohibited for a non-kohen. But I was just in Israel, and my wife took me to a friend's house, and they were growing grapes. So they gave me a clipper, and I cut the grapes, and then they taught me how to take truma. And I say bracha, baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Maseches Hashem seisavenu l'hafresh trumas u'maasros. And then you read there's a certain thing, a very interesting thing. You say more than 1/10. I'm sorry, more than 1/100th of this that I've separated. You separate a little bit more than 1/100th. More is the truma gedola, and what's left over here, the 100th that I separated, that should be together with 9 other parts that I didn't separate. Those are the meiser. In the 1/100th that I separated, that's the trumas meiser. That's the 10th of the 10th. That's there, and then you talk about the meiser sheni, and then they take it, they wrap it in a bag, and they throw it out.
They throw it out.
They throw it out, but they you can't dispose of it in a way that's disrespectful. You have to wrap it up before you throw it out.
Then you throw it in the Dead Sea.
Like, it doesn't say throwing in the Dead Sea would be other things that don't rot, like a metal of a Zara or something. Those are things that this you just anyway. Okay.
Can't give it to an animal.
No,
because you get
no.
it
It's you know what you could do maybe is you can give it to the animal of a kohen. A kohen wouldn't eat it, but the kohen's animal could eat it.
Isn't that what they
It'd be
did with
interesting.
the leftover?
But I don't think they do that.
Isn't that what they did with the leftover something? This came up, someone told me on Pesach or something, where they gave the leftover something that was shaila to the kohanim, their animals to eat.
Could be.
So
It could be a.
I remember learning that.
Okay, so what we just had over here was that we had a machlekes between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan regarding what fell in first, if the non-kosher wine fell in first, the water fell in first, or the kosher wine fell in first, right? That was a discussion. Rabbi Yochanan said it doesn't matter. And Chizkiah says, no, it does matter. That if the non-kosher wine falls in second, then everything is usher. Says, hey, Rabbi Yirmiyah tells Rabbi Zera, that matches exactly the machlekes with which yeast fell in. If according to Rabbi Eliezer, if the yeast, the truma yeast fell in second, then we say it's all truma. That's chizkiah. If according to the Rabbanan, where it doesn't matter which fell in first, according to the Chachamim, so they say, oh, that's Rabbi Yochanan. For him, it doesn't matter. Gemara says, V'tizbra, do you really think that that should be the machlekes the same? V'amar Abaya says, Leishanu al shekadim v'silikas yisr. Over there, Abaya explained that Mishnah, and this is how we had it previously in this Masechta. Abaya came in and said, it's only if you went in and you took out the yeast that was prohibited. It's also according to Rabbi Eliezer. He says, when do I say that if the second yeast is the kosher one, I say that's all permissible? That's because you removed the first yeast. So we're not talking about removing anything here. It doesn't fit. You're trying to explain Chizkiah. It's not totally not going to fit with Rabbi Eliezer. So if that's the case, Chizkiah Damar Kaman, who would Chizkiah hold like? He doesn't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, according to the way Abai explained Rabbi Eliezer, you had to remove it. Elahacha b'royin kamifli. Rather here, we're discussing something totally different. We're discussing the concept of royin. Can we have in a mixture, can we ignore a part of the mixture and allow the other part of the mixture nullify what's prohibited? It's the concept of royin. I don't have to view every detail in this. I can ignore something in the mixture and let only the min b'she'ena minai, the ena minai, overpower the minai. The what's different here would overpower. So we say like this: L'chizkiah lesli royin. Chizkiah doesn't hold of royin. He doesn't hold that you can ignore anything in this. In other words, once if the kosher wine and the water are in there, he doesn't say that I can ignore the kosher wine. He just says, when I pour the new wine, the non-kosher wine in, I can't ignore the kosher wine. I say that it fell into the kosher wine, and it becomes aser. Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Islay, he holds of the concept of royin, that you can ignore the kosher wine that's there, and you can say that the non-kosher wine fell into the water, and then you can measure how much water is there. Would there be a taste of the non-kosher wine in that water that's there? Gemara asks, does Rabbi Yochanan really hold of royin? This concept of ignoring half the mixture. But this is exactly a question that Rabasi asked Rabbi Yochanan, and we didn't get an answer for it. She says, Shnei kaises. You have two cups. Echad shel chulin v'echad shel truma. One has chulin in it and one has truma. Mazgan. And you added the water into it. And then you mixed the two cups together. You know, wine back then had to be mixed with water. And now you mix the two cups together. Ma, what's it in? Now we could say that this wine fell into that water, right? Because the other one was mixed. There was a mixture of wine and water. So I could say that the wine, the truma wine fell into the water of it. What's the din? It says v'lei pashatlei, but he didn't answer. He didn't know the answer. So what are you telling me that Rabbi Yochanan holds that you can ignore the wine and just look at the water? The Gemara answers, mikar le pashatlei. You're right. Back then he didn't know the answer. But now he knows the answer, and so now he says that we accept Ryan. Okay, it's Manami Amar Rabbi Ami Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We have a statement in Rabbi Ami in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Ramila Amar Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. That was even Rabasi. Rabasi was the one that had the question. First you mix them with the water, and then you mix the two together. You ignore the kosher wine, you say as if it's not there. I say, and then we say that the water that's there overpowers the truma, and we say that it becomes mutter even for a Yisrael. Okay, concept of Brian. If you remember, those that learned Yeridea, we had the concept of Brian in the case of Nishbach. Usually it's 1 in 60. If you're not sure, if it's 1 in 60 because the mixture spilled, then we could say, in rabbinic laws, you could say, right, you could assume that you view the min b'she'ena mina where you need 60, you ignore that and you nullify the prohibited part in mina at the same time. What happens over here is that the way we're learning it is that min b'mina is stricter. Two things of the same type, wine and wine, are stricter than wine with water. That's the way we're learning it here. It's not the way that it's presented laws of kosher and non-kosher. This is only by wine that we're saying min b'mina. Right, in kosher laws, it's the opposite. Kosher, in the laws of kosher and kashrus, we say that if two things of the same type fall one in the other, one mixed one with the other, we say that it's nullified for sure 1 in 60, but it could even be nullified 1 in 2. 3 pieces of meat. One of them is not kosher. You're allowed to eat all 3, not together. But you take one out, rabbinically, you take one out. Biblically, you're allowed to eat all 3, you know. Okay. This is a rule. Min b'minai b'mashu shlei b'mina meisin tam. When we're talking about these mixtures that we're discussing, we learned in the Mishnah, we added in, this is the rule. If it's 2 of the same type, then it becomes very strict. Wine and wine, the whole thing becomes prohibited. Shlei b'minai, if it's wine and water or something, then it's b'neisin tam, then it depends if it's giving a flavor. Rav Shmuel Damar Tavayo, Kol Yisurin Shabbatayra b'mina and b'mashu, shlei b'mina and b'neisin tam. Rav and Shmuel say that when there's a mixture of min b'minai, 2 of the same type, 2 chicken soups, one's kosher and one was made from non-kosher, they mix together, or whatever else it is, meat, whatever it is. It's always going to be, if it's the same type, it's going to be the mashu. The smallest amount is going to like activate everything, and it's going to strengthen what's prohibited here. Shlei b'mina, and if it's mixed into something else, then it's going to be b'neisin tam, then it's going to be with the it does give a flavor or not. According to what's coming to include when it says this is the rule, it's going to include everything. We were talking about in the Mishnah Yayin Nesach. Is coming to tell me that the whole entire Torah is like this. Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish say differently. They say exactly the opposite. This is the way we talk about in Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan, when he argues with Rav and Shmuel, the halach is like Rabbi Yochanan. That's why we say in the Shulchan Aruch, we always hear about 1 in 60. You didn't hear about the mashu, like, because it's following Rabbi Yochanan. So it's always 1 in 60, but nice and tam, doesn't give a flavor. Chutz, except mi tevel v'yayin nesach, except for tevel, which is unfixed grain. You didn't take the trumas from it. Or yayin nesach. Then over there, it's a separate halacha. B'mina b'mashu, shlei b'mina nice and tam. Over there, if it's in the same type, then it's b'mashu. This is the rule. What's it coming to include? Tevel. Coming to include the unfixed grain. Tani kavasei de Shmuel, the Rav Shmuel. Tani kavasei de Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish. A brisa supports Rav and Shmuel. A brisa supports Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish. Tani kavasei de Rabbi Shmuel is exactly what they said. The brisa says Kol Yisurin Shabbatayra b'mina mashu shlei b'mina neisin tam. All the laws of the Torah, if it's the same type, it's the smallest amount. If it's not the same type, then it's b'neisin tam. It doesn't give a flavor. 1 in 60. Tani kavasei de Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish. The brisa supports Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish is exactly what Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish said. All of the Torah, doesn't matter if it's the same type or not the same type, it's always 1 in 60. Except for Tevel and Yayin Nesach, that B'min B'mina is going to be B'mashu. I understand why Rabbi Yechon Reish Lakish is so strict about Yayin Nesach, because it's a wine of idolatry. Tevel, my time, what's the reason why Tevel is so strict? The reason why we're so strict is because the way that it becomes permissible is you take the smallest amount. That's the exact way that it becomes prohibited. How do you take truma? Remember I told you how we did it? A little bit more than 1/100th is already patters the whole. It makes everything. Really, we do 1 in 60, 1 in 50, 1 in 60, 1 in 40, 1 in 50, 1 in 60. Biblically, it doesn't have to be that. Biblically, the smallest amount. It's supposed to be the Tanan. That tevel, if there's a mixture of tevel, unfixed grain that mixed into other grains, you'd say that it becomes asur even b'mashu. Why? Because the way to fix it is b'mashu. You just take a little bit and it's fixed. So the smallest amount falls in, and everything becomes asur. Let's leave it here.
Is there a difference between the lush and
mashu and kosher? Yeah, there is a difference, but it's very.
You know, I was going to say,
one of them.
Kol is Kof Lamed, Mem is the next letter after, so it's got to be a very tiny difference. But
I saw in the Ha'ara and look at the Sichas, the Rebbe makes a difference between kosher and mashu. One of them, the Rebbe said, is that the smallest amount is a shear. The other one, the Rebbe said that there's no shear. It's not that there's a shear. There's no shear in Ibtasar. Otherwise, it is a shear, but it's the smallest amount. That's what the Rebbe writes that. It makes it different. It makes it into machlekes. Yeah, I think so. It makes it into machlekes, the Shach and Taz, and you're there. If it's, you say that it's a shear, or you say that there's no shear. Anyway.
No, she is.
Shkoyach.
Let's go
Okay.
down.
Have a good day, everyone.
Confused.
Yeah, nice